Gentry, and I will be challenging the population-centric strategy and restrictive rules of engagement administered in the War on Terror. I would like to introduce my panelist, Mr. Vince Russo. Mr. Russo is a retired lawyer. During his career, he primarily practiced in the area of international law. He worked on behalf of the U.S. Department of State and clients throughout this country, the Caribbean, and Europe. In addition, Mr. Russo counseled clients working in both combat and non-combat roles on behalf of the U.S. government in regions experiencing conflict, like Iraq, Palestine, Colombia, Haiti, and the Ukraine. He resides in Tallahassee with his wife and 2 children. Freedom has played a defining role in the history of the United States of America. Beginning in 1776, the United States declared independence from a monarchy, an independence that not only freed the first settlers, but provided the freedom for future generations. Independence gave these first and future Americans the opportunity to unite as a group of people defined by inalienable rights of freedom, freedom of life, freedom of liberty, as well as the pursuit of happiness. On September 11, 2001, we the people had these rights of freedom attacked by a foreign enemy. 18 years later, this day endures as more than just a horrendous memory. Americans are still actively fighting in wars that resulted from the September 11 attacks. The U.S. military remains bound to protect these founding and inalienable freedoms. The military has sworn to defend the Constitution, freedom, and democracy of the United States. They have sworn to serve as a sword, shield, sentry, and avenger of our nation. They have sworn to provide these protections while morally holding themselves to the highest principles of our country. On June 28, 2005, Operation Red Wing, a four-member force of SEAL Team 10, lost 3 members of their team in a desperate, failed attempt to carry out a crucial mission. Marcus Luttrell, the sole survivor, miraculously lived and later revealed what happened. This 4-member force was assigned a reconnaissance mission in Hindu Kush, Afghanistan, which required extreme precision to successfully operate at an altitude of 10,000 feet. This brand of terrain, with Taliban fighters dressed like civilians, presented severe threats, especially when operating within rules of engagement beyond what international law required. During the operation, the SEALs' position was compromised by local unarmed goat herders. Adhering to the rules of engagement, these SEALs released these goat herders, though strongly believing their whereabouts would be revealed to the Taliban. Soon enough, these 4 SEALs were surrounded by continually reinforced Taliban fighters. Against such odds, Luttrell's team, armed with a never-quit attitude, fought with unbelievable courage, strength, and commitment. These 3 fighting heroes ultimately lost their lives due to rules of engagement which only presented a fatal outcome. The United States Department of Defense defines rules of engagement as directives issued by a competent military authority that delineate the circumstances under which U.S. forces will initiate and/or continue combat with other forces encountered. Rules of engagement, due to the population-centric strategy, have often been created with restrictions that go far beyond international law requirements, creating extreme dilemmas for these populations of hostile countries in which they act, the United States and the United States Special Forces. To effectively remove terror, highly trained warfighters, such as the U.S. Navy SEALs, should be granted with less restrictive rules of engagement, thus operating on a basis of standards in order to adapt to the variable circumstances of asymmetrical insurgent warfare. Counterinsurgent methodology is a major characteristic of current warfare. Concerning this brand of warfare, former military analyst, Major General Perry Smith states, "You can have great tactics, but if you don't have a good strategy, it's not going to work. You can have great strategy, but if you don't have tactics that work well with the strategy, it's not going to work. So you have to have both strategy and tactics." The population-centered strategy in current warfare, adopted and publicized as winning the hearts and minds, has resulted in dire outcomes. In fact, some critics even consider it counterproductive. Insurgent wars are asymmetrical and create severe obstacles. Asymmetrical warfare is fought between 2 unequal forces, a moral force and an immoral force. The moral force is disadvantaged due to morally restrictive tactics, while the immoral force acts outside and often exploits morality. To To achieve advantage in this asymmetrical context, enemy combatants hide amongst the general population and do not wear uniforms, thereby challenging the rules of engagement and making it difficult, if not impossible, to discern civilians from military combatants. The moral force faces unforgiving encumbrances that could cost the lives of their force. The insurgency, an immoral force, is defined by the United States military doctrine as an organized movement aimed at the overthrow of a constituted government through the use of subversion and armed conflict. The goal of the insurgency is to dominate, control, and rule over the population by inflicting terror. Different counterinsurgency tactics have been constructed in asymmetrical warfare to disarm the insurgent. The United States, to a degree, is consistent with the population-centric approach. To carry out population-centric warfare, counterinsurgents must work to win the population's support. Rules of engagement are crafted upon three main components: national policy goals, operational requirements, and international law. As a result of policy goals encompassing the population-centric strategy, rules of engagement have often been created through restrictions that go far beyond international law requirements to effectively carry out the strategy. Proponents operate from the belief that in order to be successful, there must be no civilian deaths. Further challenging the implementation of the population-centric strategy, policy goals are altered as U.S. administrations change, which often weakens trust and confuses the civilian population. According to General Smith, these changes are reason for failure of the population-centric strategy. Exceedingly restrictive rules of engagement, established to create trust between the counterinsurgent and subjected population, create extensive problems because of the immoral nature of the insurgent. Lieutenant General David Ductula and Major General Charles Senlak Jr. respond to limiting rules of engagement in the war against ISIS. The rules didn't necessarily save civilian lives overall, because the ISIS fighters, who might have been killed, lived on to butcher civilians. General Dunlap compares this martyrdom to the rationale of a 19th century utilitarian philosopher, John Stuart Mill, who states, "A person may cause evil to others, not only by his action, but by his inaction, and in either case, he is justly accountable to them for the injury." Overly restrictive rules of engagement, as referenced by General Dunlap and General Ductula, encourage excessive exploitation by insurgent forces. Recurring incidences of exploitation include insurgents positioning themselves within the civilian population and using civilians as human shields. Referring to the fight against ISIS, General Dunlap reiterates the United Nations statement. The more radical ISIS leaders became, the more they made use of this gambit, and when the operation to recapture Mosul began in October of 2016, fighters forced tens of thousands more civilians into the city and executed those who refused to comply. The strategy intended to win the hearts and minds ironically has produced grave consequences and can even be counterproductive. General Ductula further states, "Such policies limit civilian casualties that may result from attacking the terrorists, but allow the certainty of civilians being slaughtered at the hands of those same terrorists if they are not eliminated. That is self-defeating at best and counterproductive at worst. To be sure, it is immoral." In order to win the population, the U.S. must be able to rid the population of hostile threats. Population-centric warfare strongly focuses on long-term objectives, though sometimes overly restrictive limitations obstruct protection from active terror. Military officer and the Judge Advocates General Corps, lawyer and professor at St. Mary's University School of Law, Jeffrey Adcock asserts. Aaron Hennekamp also states, the editor-in-chief of the Georgetown Law Journal, that they should fight with standards of engagement rather than with binding rules. In his journal, he posits, by contrast, a standard is a directive which specifies the outcome, but which leaves a complete end open to the soldier to adapt to vertical circumstances. As such, standards are outcome-based, and the means of achieving this outcome are not prescribed. General Dunlap blames overly restrictive rules of engagement on the effort to assuage critics. Jeffrey Adcock states, "The level of micromanagement developed by politicians defining the rules of engagement rather than military experts created rules that were so restrictive and confusing that they ultimately encountered the military objective of victory." He even states that the rules of engagement directly contributed to the failure of the Afghan war. Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin shares a similar view as he contrasts current warfare with warfare up through World War II. For the United States, a new warfare paradigm, winning the hearts and minds, exists that would make the success of D-Day efforts doubtful if executed today. In fact, warfare has always been an extension of politics. But since World War II, politics began to impede the American warfighting, to the extent that victory is fleeting at best and unlikely at worst. Another problem attributed to the rules of engagement, beyond the initial fear that is a cost of failure to meet the requirements, is a tendency of commanders to overregulate due to the fear of misinterpretation. General Dunham attributes this overregulation to the lack of any incentive to guard against the risk when you're protected against it. This overregulation can produce dire consequences, such as second-guessing and hesitation, which can lead to further problems in capturing critical targets. Rules of engagement also oversimplify war in seemingly gray areas, creating moral dilemmas due to the exploitative nature of the insurgent. Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell, in his book, Lone Survivor, adds weight to this argument. Luttrell says, "Our rules of engagement in Afghanistan specified that we could not shoot, kill, or injure unarmed civilians. But what about the unarmed civilian who's a skilled spy for the legal forces we were trying to move? What about an entire secret army, diverse, fragmented, and lethal, creeping through the mountains in Afghanistan, pretending to be civilians? How about the innocent-looking camel drover, making its way through the mountain passes with enough high explosives strapped to the backs of the beasts to blow up Yankee Stadium? We were sent to Afghanistan to carry out hugely dangerous missions, but we were also told that we could not shoot the camel driver before he blew all of us up because he might be an unarmed civilian just taking his dynamite for a walk." Modification of rules of engagement restrictions, or a standard-based approach, will provide leeway to protect the innocent. As previously noted, through example and anecdote, the dangers of inaction must be strongly considered when seeking to rid a country of insurgent activity. General Dunlop emphasizes, "It's a grim reminder that there's no such thing as an immaculate war if evil is going to be stopped. Let's have the fortitude to see the mission, even as we grieve the cost." A standards-based approach, as Pennekamp suggests, can allow warriors with intensive training to achieve specified outcomes while dealing with an elusive immoral force. The warfighter's high-level and continual training can provide assurance of physical and mental toughness and moral capability to adapt in very local circumstances. Military who especially have this brand of training are the United States Navy SEALs, recognized as the world's most highly trained maritime warriors. Navy SEALs undergo basic underwater demolition and SEAL training, also known as BUDS, which seeks to break candidates down both physically and psychologically. Throughout this training, candidates' character is intently scrutinized as they complete grueling training evolutions and perfect elite technical skills. Richard Whiteside, a former Navy SEAL officer, describes his training as intentionally demanding to weed out those who lack courage, commitment, and most importantly, self-motivation. The ruthless elimination aspect of BUDS begins the day candidates arrive because the SEALs cannot tolerate a suspect component. 75 to 80% of candidates will fail BUDS. Beyond just brute physical strength, mental toughness is imperative for these dangerous arenas in which these warriors ascend. Former Navy SEAL officer and co-author of Extreme Ownership, Lee Fabin writes, "Hell Week was not a physical test, but a mental one. Success resulted from determination and will, but also from innovation and communication with a team. Such training graduated men who were not only physically tough, but could also outthink their adversary." BUDS training is just the beginning. SEALs continually receive specialized training and rehearse scenarios to critique their every battlefield, to learn what they can improve upon in success and failure. Both historically and currently, war has prompted profound moral questions, and warfare strategies and tactics have faced extensive criticism, ultimately because of the sanctity of human life. For war to be defined as just war theory in parts, it must be a last resort after means of negotiation have been exhausted. Therefore, the current situation is in dire need of change. British author and theologian C.S. Lewis writes, "If war is ever lawful, then peace is sometimes sinful." From a Christian perspective, God embodies justice, and his heart is devoted toward his creation. In Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' words in verse 9 are, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." In Greek, peacemaker translates to erinopoulos, which means pacific or loving peace. When rules of engagement become so restrictive that the United States can no longer fight for peace, but watch a brutal, immoral force destroy its people, this is no longer loving peace. Inaction, when defense is needed, can be as destructive or even more destructive than warfare itself. Former Navy SEAL and co-author of Extreme Ownership, Lieutenant Commander Jocko Willink powerfully speaks.
War is hell. But war is also an incredible teacher, a brutal teacher. And it teaches you lessons that you will not forget. In war, you are forced to see humanity at its absolute worst. And you are also blessed to see humanity in its most glorious moments. War teaches you about sorrow and loss and pain. And it teaches you about the preciousness and the fragility of human life. And in that fragility, war teaches you about death. But war also teaches you about brotherhood and honor and humility and leadership. And unfortunately, war teaches you the most when things go wrong.
As a country, founded upon freedom, it is our highest duty to challenge and scrutinize strategies and tactics, because in the horrors of war, every decision affects life. Thank you.
Sailor, great job, and I just want to say thanks for including me in your research. You did a real thorough analysis of a really difficult issue, and with that, I just wanted to ask you a point of clarification and then maybe hit you with a hypothetical. So, the point of clarification is this. So let's go back to the Marcus Luttrell. He's up on the mountain with his 3 unit members, and they come across the goat herders. Let's say for a second that they had decided that their mission was more important than the rules of engagement and had shot the goat herders. Who would have ever known?
Definitely. So obviously those people at the goat herders, the family of them would have noticed, where's my brother, where's my father? And also Marcus Luttrell also talks about how the Arab media and their media is really constant. They're really like they really show this to the American media, and they're constantly relaying things back to the American media through their eyes, if that makes sense. And so they would have been hounding upon them. Marcus Luttrell spends many, many pages in his book Lone Survivor talking about this media and how, they see us as these just Americans murderers and stuff over here and then our media will take that, and so the whole world will know because they're constantly hounding upon our people in this media.
Okay, so let's say for a second that they had gone ahead and shot the goat herders and then proceeded with their mission. And let's say they went back and reported what they had done. And let's say there were no rules of engagement. Could there have been any other consequences to those soldiers for what they had done?
Beyond the rules of engagement? Well, they could have been charged. Well, international law says that it must be out of like, you must have an intent of killing these people, and so that could have been seen not as self-defense rather than as an intent, which I don't believe. I believe that fully that was their only option, but people could definitely put it in a way that it was more towards they were just killing these people just to get them out of the way rather than it being a last resort.
Okay, so they could have potentially been charged with murder under the Uniform Code, which begs the question, which I think is the point you're making, that there are other consequences. So why do you need an extra layer of political rules on top of what's already a code of, with essentially a criminal code, right? So that they have to live by. And I think that this points out another issue about your research, which is that we take for granted sometimes in the world we're in that we have sort of a common moral code with those that we're closest to. But a lot of the folks in the military come from various backgrounds and may not share that code. And I think the way that you articulated how the SEALs are trained, both physically but also in the way that they think, is I think an effort to instill a way of behavior that should transcend these rules of engagement. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, because they're highly trained. I wouldn't trust just some regular military man who's went through very low training to do something like this. This takes extreme training and putting you at more of a, as in Hell Week is talking more about a mental toughness rather than just a physical toughness. Mental toughness is extreme imperative to be able to go through with missions that they go to at their level of difficulty.
Well, and one last curiosity question, I guess, in your research, did you encounter any circumstances where soldiers were punished for violating the rules of engagement, but were not criminally punished for whatever the behavior was that underlied that action?
Yes, there was one man that I specifically read of in Jentry. He is actually was in the Judge Advocates for the Poor, which is like a lawyer type military corps kind of. And he was talking about this like through the whole entire article about this man named Joshua Waddell, who he was charged with administrative measures where he was demoted rather than being charged with war crimes. And so with that, he has very minimal rights in the military and stuff like that. So his career was basically gone. Many military journals and stuff like that have been writing about oh look, just the injustice of he had really no rights to get back on. His career was basically wasted because of those administrative punishment rather than a court punishment.
Great. Well, once again, fantastic job. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. If so.